There's a huge amount of talk about data, and data is not just a business tool and it's not just a targeting tool. Data can be a really creative tool if it's leveraged really well in two ways. Number one, if you understand more about your target from the use of data, you have a better ability to create content and create products and create propositions that they're more likely to be into. So that's the very obvious use of data, but you can also tell a brand story with it. Spotify had a campaign called, I think, 2016, Thanks for Being Weird, where they just used their data to tell stories about how people used Spotify. So if you look at this piece of copy, they've got a massively culturally relevant piece that they're leveraging in terms of Brexit and how much focus there was. They're leveraging herd mentality in terms of showing you just how many people are always using Spotify. And they're demonstrating exactly the benefit of the product, which is that you can download and listen to context-specific music for whatever mood you're in without actually having to own it. So there's a huge amount that they're doing, and it makes you smile because it's a clever piece of copy. They're doing all of that just by leveraging their data. So the question for you guys is, can I use my data to learn more about my target and therefore create better copy and better products? Or can I use the data to actually tell the brand story in terms of how people are doing it? That's a way to be relevant to your target and to people's lives. Second thing I want to talk about is looking at real micro moments of relevance. So if there's 330 ads a day that people are being exposed to and people are being shouted at, at the very least, you need to shout at a time when people are going to do something about your category, or at the very least, be thinking about it. TransferWise is a company that's really, really cleverly used Facebook. And part of what they're doing is basically transferring money from one geography and one currency into the other. They use Facebook really well because they know where people are from, and they know where people are living now, and they know some demographics about them. So they can pretty much tell if a person is working in another market and likely to be trying to send money back. And a lot of the time, they can be at a point of relevance when someone is talking to people back from where they're from and have their message hyper-targeted at the people who are likely to use their product the most. They do this really well in terms of Kiwis who are working in Australia and targeting them with a relevant piece of content.
What is it? What?
I'm meant to know what that means.
I don't know, I've never heard that before. Chili bin.
A bin where you throw your chilies.
Something spicy.
Like a burrito bowl.
Isn't it like a pie thing?
Chips. I don't know, with chili on it.
Oh, that's an esky.
Esky.
Yeah.
Esky. Pack a sad. Backpack? Pack? I have no idea.
Pack of sad. Cigarettes, maybe. Sounds like a bit of a cigarette thing. You're depressed?
When you put your emotions away. Oh, I know. You're just really, you're just having a bad day and you're packing a sad.
Scucks.
It just sounds rude, doesn't it?
Isn't that like a mean thing to call someone? Scucks.
Isn't that some, gangster word? Oh, scucks. Like when you, meet a girl or a boy, you want to, scucks them?
Really cool.
Oh. I feel like this is some setup.
This is a trick question. I'm not answering that.
No idea. Who says these things?
I have absolutely no idea because I'm neither from Australia nor New Zealand, so I'm completely lost. But obviously that's a piece of content that's really going to resonate with Kiwis who are living in Australia. But it's the targeting that's the really clever bit to stand out from the clutter in terms of how that's being used. Third piece I want to use here is looking at nudges like loss aversion. Now, Donald Trump is being used in a million different presentations to highlight a million different points. So I apologize for his face. But I'm not trying to say that Donald Trump won the election because of he cleverly leveraged loss aversion. But a lot of the time, we slag off the Americans, we slag off the situation that's happened there, and we slag off Trump and all the ridiculousness that's happening. And we fail to realize that a huge amount of the people who voted for Donald Trump didn't actually like Donald Trump. But he represented something which for them was stopping losing the things that made America, America. They don't necessarily like him, but he represented an incredibly strong call to stop the loss in America. Loss of money, loss of jobs, loss of control, loss of Americanness. So even if you didn't like Donald Trump, there was an effective argument that he was going to stop the seeping out of America of all the values that they held dear. And it's a really good example that at the moment, an ugly brand that answers a need is increasingly more effective than a very slick and refined brand that doesn't. And nowhere is there a more ugly example of a brand answering an unmet and underlying need than potentially Donald Trump. Apologise to any Trump supporters that might be in the room. The last thing I wanted to talk about in this area of being relevant is when we're cutting through, it's not just about communications, it's also about actually transacting. I'm pretty sure everyone in the room is familiar with the story of Dollar Shave Club and their $1 billion sale. They had amazing, really, really good standout creative, and it was really effective, and it went viral, and we all really, really enjoyed it. What was best about their avoidance of clutter actually wasn't their comms, it was their business model. There's no way they could have competed on shelf with the competitors. They wouldn't have had the power, they wouldn't have had the standout, and actually their premium price just would have looked cheap when compared with the alternative. But they avoided that entire battle by looking at a subscription model. So when we talk about clutter, it's not just about comms, it's about headspace and being more relevant for people. So the clutter they avoided was actually the entire head wreck that was going to be the shelf space for them. So the really innovative bit was a business model, and they had the brand and they had the communications to help support that in the amazing stuff that we saw and went viral all around the world. The last thing I want to talk about is using trial and error and using utility when we're talking about communications. A lot of you will know this, but the now famous Meerkat campaign for Compare the Market actually occurred as a result of an experiment. So if you look at Go Compare and Compare the Market and Money Supermarket, from fairly functional things, those are like real bona fide brands now in terms of what they've put into their values and their communications and their spend. Compare the Market was, at the time that they came up with this campaign, struggling with the cost of AdWords and the cost of search optimization in terms of bidding on Compare the Market. Compare the Meerkat was understandably a much cheaper AdWord for them to purchase and buy. So this campaign, and if you read VCCP's account of this, they talk about how central search strategy was in coming up with this campaign. The important thing is they experimented. They just tried it out. Now, it happened to be massively successful, but even if it hadn't, it was worthy of them being innovative and trying something out. I think it's Snapchat. I heard the guy who invented that speak at a conference. And he was talking about the fact that all of their developers are empowered to roll out an idea that they have to an entire 1% of Snapchat's base, just to see if it works, without having to go through the whole approval chain, just to keep their innovative culture alive. And I think it's a great lesson for us, particularly when we look at digital and social. Our ability to be able to experiment with things is massive now. So what I'd be asking you guys to think about is there a theory you have? Is there a small ring-fenced experiment that you can do to see if it holds any weight? And is there a way for you to make it scalable after that? Because we've never been as able to experiment with different things and see what works rather than commit to a huge amount of spend beforehand as we are today. So it's really worth remembering that. Second thing in this area is providing utility. It sounds like the most ridiculously basic thing that you could talk about when you're communicating is to talk about something useful or do something useful for the person that is then seeing that. But we often forget it. And a lot of the time, even when you're talking about something that's genuinely useful, like mobile coverage, because it's useful to know about that, sometimes you still need to say, why is it useful, and demonstrate a way in which it's powerful. And the mobile phones are really a good example of this in action, because a mobile phone company talks about its coverage in the same way that every other mobile phone company talks about its coverage, and they all negate each other, and we've no idea what coverage is where. If you look at what Optus did in the Australia market, they actually just did something useful with the network. So Australia is the highest place in the world in terms of shark attacks, lethal shark attacks and injury, etc. And that's bad for people, but it's also bad for sharks, because there tends to be a culling of them after that as people get really, really angry. What Optus simply did was they used their network, putting buoys into the water, and they created a shark detection system that would go back to the lifeguards, and people would say, out of the water, and the people are safe, and the sharks are safe. It really, really stood out because it was just a demonstration of their coverage rather than talking about it, and it was useful to society. So it's worth asking ourselves when we're trying to communicate a message, is this message actually useful to how a person uses this product? Can I demo it rather than just say it? And is there also something good I can do for society or the market while I'm doing that along the way? And we'd be surprised at how many times the answer to that might well be yes. There's loads of examples of this, not just Optus. There was a campaign Samsung did in Argentina where they demoed their TV screens effectively on the back of long trucks to make the roads safer in terms of overtaking trucks. We have Volvo Life Paint. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this. Because of their safety credentials, Volvo developed a paint that was transparent when you put it on, but was massively reflective when car headlights passed over it. Looking at their commitment to safety, but also doing something useful for the market. And the last thing I want to talk about in this area of trial and utility is using NPD as marketing, and then also potentially using marketing as a piece of NPD. And this is effectively developing a product whose primary function is not necessarily to sell and be commercially viable, but to say something about the brand. And actually, more than anyone else, car companies do this really well with concept cars. I'm sure some of you have seen these amazing, crazy-looking concept cars that we know will never get made, but they're really, really cool. They go viral, and people are taking a look at, well, what does this say about the Mercedes brands or the BMW brand or whatever it is that is being promoted at the time. There is a lot of examples of this. I think my favorite is Harvey Nichols' Sorry I Spent It On Myself campaign for Christmas a couple of years ago. I don't know if anybody remembers this. Obviously, the insight being, it's better to give than to receive, but is it really? Maybe not. And when we're out a lot of the time and we're shopping for Christmas presents for other people, we find stuff that we'd really, really like ourselves. And what Harvey Nichols did is they just leveraged this really well, and they created a set of really awful products that you would give to somebody because you had spent the money you were going to spend on them, actually on yourself, because of the irresistible stuff that you'd seen in Harvey Nichols. I think one of the really interesting and successful things about this campaign, they sold 20,000 units of these terrible products, like a packet of paper clips, a Brillo pad, really awful stuff. But the fact that people didn't only think it was funny, actually started buying these presents as novelty goods to give to other people. So it was a piece of NPD never designed to make money, but massively pervasive for people. It can also happen the other way around. I don't know if anyone is familiar with Gatorade Replay. Rather than try and explain it, I'm just going to show you what it was about.
Welcome to the 87th meeting between the State Liners of Phillipsburg and the Red Rovers of Easton.
A 27-yard field goal attempt. It's blocked. The whistle has blown. This one is over. A sister kisser.
Time might be worse than a loss. We think we have a score to settle.
Gatorade has chosen to team up with the towns of Phillipsburg, New Jersey, and Easton.
We're inviting the guys from the 93 team to strap on the helmet and the shoulder pads and replay that game to determine the true champion once and for all.
I said to Coach, we're going to kind of come out in sweats and warm up, and he said, no, we go full pads every day. And I'm like, Coach, we're in our 30s. Come on now.
My first thought was, who are the crazies that are going to suit it up and try and play football?
We shouldn't be doing this.
15 years away from the game, you're just not going to be able to get that kind of finesse in a day.
Your eyes are certainly showing concussion.
A lot of people out there saying you can't do it. Let's prove them wrong. 1, 2, 3, 10.
10,000 tickets sold out in 90 minutes.
The field temperature right now is at 100 degrees. They look at your age and they say you can't do it. They didn't look at your heart. They got to look inside of you. Get your extra up and play the damn game.
No matter how old you are, 8 to 80, blind, cripple, or crazy, you're always an athlete.
So that's a pretty old example at this point, and it was really, really successful for Gatorade, and it's all a little bit American. The reason I play that is because that actually became a commercially successful revenue-generating TV show. But they just went around and they found all these teams, and I think it ran for 5 or 6 series. So when we look at NPD as marketing, we can also look at marketing translating back into NPD, which is an interesting way to look at it. I think when we look at this whole interplay between marketing and products, Possibly my favorite example is from BrewDog. I really like just the whole brand and the irreverence that this brand has. They, to celebrate the Olympics and the fact that not everybody always plays by the rules in the Olympics, they brewed a beer that was made completely of illegal substances or banned substances, and they called it Never Mind the Antibiotics. And just, it's not about selling any of that beer, but it tells you about the tone of what BrewDog is really all about, and how they approach brewing beer. So, just to recap, when we're looking at trying to understand how to get around clutter, it's always looking long term and making sure that's a lot of where our focus is, so we're not contributing to the clutter and we're thinking about where we're trying to go. It's about being relevant with the message, but also in the moment that you're trying to communicate with people. And we're talking about constantly using trial and learning from that and learning more about your category in this changing communication environment, and really being as useful as you can in terms of what you're saying, how you're saying it, and what the benefits that can have. And if we do a lot of those things, we ask ourselves those questions, we're all much more likely to create a situation where people become more like penguins. And effectively, that's really the reason that we're all in this game, is to convert people into penguins. Thank you very much.